Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope you came with questions. We're very fortunate to have Sarah and Nick join us tonight to talk about their policy training experiences. Oh, and there's Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, yes, I had some connectivity issues. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. We figured we're just getting started. So yeah, we're very fortunate to have them here tonight. So if you guys wouldn't mind, I will just kind of let you introduce yourself. So maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and the fellowship you did and kind of why you're interested in science policy. So Nick, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So my name is Nick Grant. I'm a clinical psychologist. I finished my PhD 5 years ago in 2015. I did a mostly clinical but combined clinical research postdoc after that at the San Diego VA. And then that was the year I applied for my policy fellowship through the American Psychological Association. So they were my sponsoring organization through the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, who actually runs the fellowship, the Congressional Fellowship on the Hill. So I did that back in 2016, 2017, spent 3 years in DC, and then last year I commissioned into the Navy, and now I'm a Navy psychologist. The science policy piece specifically, I had in my research lab, we did a lot of program development for mental health. And so that kind of gave me the program lens for looking at the way that people access mental health. And then throughout my training, I really got interested in the way that policy impacted the delivery of mental health, like from the larger policy level to the system level to the provider level to the patient level. My research lab was really focused on LGBTQ individuals, and so that's what my focus has been. And then when I was doing that VA postdoc prior to the fellowship, I was working specifically running an LGBTQ veteran mental health program. So that year, things really came together and motivated me to apply for the policy fellowship. And I can talk more about that experience, but I'll leave my introduction there.
Great. And Sarah? You're on mute.
Can you guys hear me okay now? Yeah, okay. So I just finished my PhD last year prior to my 1 year fellowship. So I spent 6 years in Colorado. I completed both my master's and PhD at Colorado State University. I studied applied developmental science. So I was really interested in the application of developmental research, particularly early childhood development, school readiness, child care, family systems research, and how that could be applied in the real world. Initially was interested in that from a program implementation standpoint. And then as I progressed in my program, got involved with the research to policy collaboration, did a Doris Duke Fellowship for my predoctoral work, became much more interested in the policy level lens, and that's when I applied for the state level fellowship.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, thanks again for being here and for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us. So I have a few questions, hopefully, that can guide our discussion, but I definitely want everyone attending to ask questions as they come up. So feel free to post them in the chat or just unmute yourself and interrupt and ask, okay? So I guess let's start with maybe both of you talking a little bit more about the fellowship and kind of maybe a little more detail about how you heard about it and why you decided to apply for it, like what you felt about it was going to be a good fit for you.
I'll defer to you, Sarah, since I went first last time.
Okay, sounds good. So I heard about the fellowship primarily, I guess, through the Doris Duke Fellowship Network. Quite a few prior fellows applied for the federal level fellowship. But the state level fellowship, which I was a part of, was new. So I had a colleague who had participated in that, and then I did a lot of these kind of discussions with the early cohorts of fellows to learn a little bit more about it.
I'll say I am unfamiliar with the state level fellowship, so now I'm really interested in hearing more of your experience also, Sarah, but I'll talk a little bit about the federal level one. So I actually first became aware of the congressional fellowship I think it was 2 years before I applied. Came across some random listserv, and it was something I was interested in because during the year, during my pre-doctoral internship year, I was co-enrolled in my PhD program and an LGBT health policy and practice graduate certificate program through GW. And so that was my more hands-on experience learning about policy. So that's what kind of pinged my interest a couple years back. And then I was tracking on that as I moved into the VA and was doing a lot of work advocating for that program that I was running and really having to lean on the research to make a federal system, the VA hospital, listen to the requests, not just of the patients, but like what was in the best care of mental health of LGBTQ veterans. So that's how I learned about it, and then really doing that work in the VA is what prompted me to decide to try for it. And I often tell people I don't know a lot of things. I don't pretend to be an expert. I mean, I'm just a few years out of my PhD. That's not how I identify in any way, but I always do say I know a lot of people. I don't know a lot of things, but I know a lot of people. And when I told my mentor from my postdoc at the VA that I was interested in this, she immediately said that she had a supervisee, this is all the clinical kind of world, but from a couple years beforehand who had done a women's health VA research postdoc who applied. And so she connected me with that psychologist, and I got like firsthand experience about learning of the application process and got to network with her. And then kind of that opened more doors of talking to people who had either gone through the application process or actually through the fellowship. And then that's how I learned more about it going in, because I will say one thing about the application process, at least for the APA, and I think the other organizations kind of follow suit. Everybody's application kind of looks the same, and the interviews kind of have a standardized set of questions. They don't give a lot of detail to what it would be like to work on the Hill, because there's so much variance from office to office, from the House and the Senate, from the member and their staff. There's just so much variance that they really couldn't give you an accurate depiction of what we're getting into. So having those conversations and reaching out was really, really helpful in my process of like feeling comfortable and like ready to apply. I'm also somebody who likes to lean in and try new things. So I think that was helpful, but I always tell people there's no harm in applying. It takes time, but it at least gives you that experience of like knowing what you're working towards.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the application process and how it likely has some standard kind of questions, can you say a little bit more about what that application process is like, both like written and interview?
Yeah, sure. So I will monologue, because I've answered this question before, what the process looks like. So for the APA, and again, I think it is pretty standardized, you submit your application, which includes 2 to 3 letters of recommendation, a standard application about who you are, and then a cover letter. The cover letter, and this is advice that I give everybody, what I believe they want to see is a thread. What has your policy not only experience, because not everybody's going to have the policy experience, but where did your interest stem from? How has it developed over time? And then what things have you done to try and like grow your skill or expose yourself in that area more, or expose yourself to policy more? So I think that again, not everybody's going to have a lot of policy experience, even in graduate school. So being able to show that you have had a sustained interest and done things outside of your field of study to engage with or learn more or expand your skill set is extraordinarily helpful in showing that like this is something you want to do, not an email you saw and you thought you would apply to. That was my experience. That is kind of how I've talked about it in the past. So I think that stands out a lot for the application as far as the letter. The next step in the process, and again, I'm speaking from my experience with the APA, but I believe, again, the standardization, is if you're selected to be a quote finalist, you get invited to do an interview. I think there's variants again, like interviews in person, interviews, everything's over, is virtual now. When I went for my interview, there was a writing test, which is, I came to learn is very DC, right? Like there's gonna be a writing test after the application where they're gonna wanna give you some task to do. And sometimes they're very busy tasks and sometimes they're really trying to see your style and your skill set. That piece was writing a policy brief. It's only 2 pages, but it's them getting a sense of how you're gonna pull together and understand policy implication and what your recommendation regarding policy would be. So 2 pages, you're allowed to use any resource that you want during that process, except for talking to past fellows. So I always tell people when we're having like these informational interviews, like all the details I can, because I say when you get to that point, I can't help you with that, but I'll tell you as much as I can at this point. They gave us a list of, I think, 4 topics to choose from. So there was some variability there as far as what you were most interested in or what you might already have a knowledge base in. I can't remember what mine was at this time. I think it had something to do with gun control, but if not, that was definitely one of the options. You then submit that. You have a 10-day period. You have to turn it in by midnight on the 10th day. You submit that, and then I remember thinking this was the weirdest part. You never hear anything about it. You are already a finalist. You're getting an interview. You've done your test. Then you go, when I went for my interview, ours were in person at that time. And it was, I forget what the term is, but basically a performance interview where there's like 10 of them and 1 of you. And I'm a very extroverted person, and I try and use humor to mitigate any like anxiety that I experience. So I went in and it was actually very comfortable. They of course start out by talking about how amazing your application is and building you up and reducing that anxiety. And then they have standardized questions that they go around and ask. Some of them spoke to like the differences in offices and how they can't give you a thing, but how you would handle, I remember these like the stressors. How would you handle having a graduate degree and being asked to fill water cups and pick up mail and do things in a short amount of time and have a boss who's definitely going to be younger than you, and a series of questions. But then lo and behold, your memo, your writing assignment comes back up. It's the surprise question in the interview process. And they give you 2 minutes to basically brief the interviewers as though you were briefing your Congress member, giving them the full, as much as you can in 2 minutes, the full background from your memo, all the way through to your recommendation. They say, pretend you're either walking to the car, in the elevator with the member, and how would you present this information in a concise, timely manner? I will share that I was given a heads up about this, that piece of it from a past fellow. So I was very grateful for that, because had that happened to me without knowing, I just always tell people I would have fallen out of my chair. I would have no idea how to kind of like role play that in the moment. So that is the application and interview process from my experience.
Yeah, Sarah, do you have other insider intel to add?
Yeah, so it's quite a bit different from the SRCD state level application process anyways. I know from the federal level, it sounds like it might be similar. There's a similar interviewing process, but for the state level, you submit a letter of an intent. And so since you are basically applying to be placed in a state agency for a year, you have to already have a supervisor in mind at the state agency where you want to work. And then you also have an academic mentor. And that's true for both the pre-doc and the postdoc. For the postdoc, I was able to choose an academic mentor at a different institution within more of a research organization and less of an academic position as my PhD advisor was. And then all 3 of you write this letter of intent together, kind of laying out some ideas for what you want to do over the course of the year and why this fellowship is important to the agency and to the fellow's professional development. And then from there, they review those applications and letters of interest and then select a certain number of them to proceed to the next round. And that's the full application. It looks pretty similar to the letter of intent. It's just expanded a bit, and you add a bit more detail about what you hope to achieve during the fellowship year. And then there's actually no interview process. So you're selected based on that, that application.
Okay. So maybe you guys can now talk about what you are actually doing in your role, like day-to-day tasks, skills, that kind of thing.
Nick, do you want to go?
No, you can go.
That's fine. I can just kind of summarize quickly and then I'll hand it over to you. So at the state level, you're really entrenched into the office and the organizational structure. It's a 40-hour-a-week placement in the office. Obviously, my time was cut short because of COVID, so we were virtual, and there was an office reorganization. So almost half of the year I was actually virtual from my colleagues. But when you are in the office, you're just a regular employee. So what that meant was day to day, I was working on programs that I was assigned through my portfolio of projects, which means I was communicating with program implementation personnel at the county level who are implementing the programs that the office was engaged in. I was attending partnership meetings with my supervisor. I was working on independent research for the agency as different needs came up. So as COVID hit, they asked me to do analysis around different budget requirements and kind of keeping track of legislation that was coming through. And so it really was really across the board, a lot of different activities that you can be involved in, and it really depends on how you want to create your fellowship year. If you really want to be engaged in some of the more research that you might be more comfortable with, or if you want to kind of dive into some of the more applied work like program implementation, or to have an experience with the policy and legislative session as well.
So cool. Definitely some similarities. So I will share that I worked for Senator Gillibrand from New York, and I worked across three of her, two major portfolios and one smaller portfolio. So I worked on the military legislative team primarily, and I handled lots of stuff, but mostly the personnel related stuff, including military families and children. I also worked on the healthcare team, and that was broken down across a number of us, mostly fellows actually, but I handled mental health and cancer and a few other areas. And then I handled the very tiny LGBTQ portfolio. The actual activities varied quite a bit. And I would say that from my perspective, I think that the way that fellows are utilized on the Hill is dependent not so much on the member, but on the staff, because the staff are the supervisors and they're going to be the ones that basically like task you with whatever it is that they want you to do. But similarly, like you are another staff member, you're free staff to them because your agents or your association is funding you. So they can use you in whatever way they deem fit. This is like one of those lessons I wish I'd known prior to accepting my placement. The individual who I worked under in the military team really, I think again, as an extroverted person, utilized me to take a lot of constituent meetings. So that was over 50% of my time. And obviously a very popular big name senator, and so a lot of people were coming in even outside of New York to meet with her in addition to her roles on various committees. So I did a lot of constituency meetings. I did a lot of letter writing, I would say like ghostwriting and supporting for the senator around different issues. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets twice a week, so a lot of that work was writing memos and doing research on whatever those topics were. It was the election year, so there were a lot of hearings about nominees, so a lot of that was going on. In my experience in the office I was in, I do not think this is generalizable, but the majority of the staff's view on research was Google. Like they thought that was like where all of the information was going to come. And I understood like efficiency and getting things done. So they wanted to have like quick bites that they could get. But I will say the senator actually told the fellows, because there are a number of us, like, I need you to teach them like what like how to find like accurate sources. I mean, they always did due diligence, but to like really understand like what the research was saying, not just what Google or the news was translating it to be. In addition to that, we helped with various hearings. I was, the senator was the ranking member of the subcommittee on personnel. So that was a really primary role that I took, was helping her prepare for those committee meetings, as well as all the work related to personnel across the military that she was leading. The National Defense Authorization Act is the big military spending bill for the year. So that was a huge month-long project that our team took over. Let's see, what else did we do? I would say there was variability as far as leaning into engaging research a bit more. The fellow in my office, who has a background, her PhD's in education, she couldn't join us tonight. She did, I would say, a lot more traditional research, working primarily on the family and child policy portfolio, and then we also work together on the health portfolio. So again, there's a lot of variability. Sometimes I think that people can be used more administratively, which is not the greatest experience. It wasn't, I don't want to say greatest. It wasn't my ideal experience, but I still think through indirect exposure and being there through the processes, I learned a lot, even though I wasn't like writing a lot of legislation myself or working in that area. But it was cool to have a research background and be able to support the larger team understanding research better overall.
Yeah, thank you. How did you guys kind of determine the placement that you ended up with? It sounds like Sarah had to do a lot of that research like up front. Was that true for you, Nick, as well? Like, how did you guys determine your placements, or which group you were, or person you were interested in working with?
I'll go first this time. So for the AAAS Fellowship, the Congressional Fellowship, they actually do, AAAS does a lot of organizing, and so all the sponsoring organizations fund their fellows to go through it, and AAAS is there to provide like a support and a structure. And one of those is they create at the very beginning of the year this, they call it the book, of all the offices who are aware of AAAS fellows and are looking to take on a fellow that year. So for the first 2 weeks of the fellowship, you're in a hotel ballroom with like 300 people going through this like very executive branch focused orientation. And then the last few days are congressionally focused. So we kind of pick up more things at that point. And then at the end of it, they have this thing, and I recall that they were talking about changing the name, but they called it Nerd Prom. And Nerd Prom was when basically they hosted a reception, so staff members from the offices could come in and meet all the fellows. Like we were there like we were there to be kind of like picked at, and like some people were like literally doing interviews during the reception, and some people were scheduling interviews for later. You weren't allowed to contact offices before then, but at the end of the reception, you were allowed to. You were able to go through this book. It was usually just a half page on what the office was, member, committee, House or Senate, and then maybe a sentence or two up to a paragraph description of like what portfolio areas they wanted covered. And so like they were looking for fit in that regard as well. From that point forward, everybody started shooting off introductory, these were like 2-sentence emails with a 2-page resume. And imagine like turning a CV into a 2-page resume. It's a task in and of itself. And then you schedule 30-minute interviews. People run around and do their interviews over the next few days. And I would say the majority of our cohort of 35 fellows that year were placed well within 2 weeks. Personally, I wanted to do something that was focused, where I would get opportunity to work in LGBTQ issues, mental health issues. And I later found out that I would like to call this a humble brag, but I really think it's more of a manipulation. My office tailored their description to fit my interests because they had their fellow from the previous year like look me up and find out like what would, because there was also a psychologist from APA. They're like, we want another psychologist. So they made it, you know, they tailored it a little bit so they could recruit me accordingly. But yeah, I negotiated. I had one offer and I told them I needed a little more time. The offers were between Senator Feinstein and Senator Gillibrand. And then in addition to the book, you're also able to contact other offices who may not be familiar with the program or never had a fellow in the past and just say, hey, I'm free labor for a year, and of course give a background, appropriately market yourself, and interview. And I did have an interview with Senator Baldwin's staff because of that, but ultimately ended up where the fit on paper looked the best.
Yeah, and for the state fellowship, like you mentioned, you have to decide ahead of time. And once you know which state you're going to work in, the state agencies, it's pretty limited from there. So it's the agency or office that works on early childhood. In my case, the Office of Early Childhood in Colorado, which administers our child care programs and home visiting and other programs like that.
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple questions in the chat. So Jenna asked, what sorts of things do you think helped you to stand out in the application process?
I can take this one first. So I think really it was, you know, kind of like Nick already described in your application, kind of walking them through that process of, you know, what your background is. And even if you don't have that much experience in policy, kind of tying what you've done to your interests in policy. And I think one thing that I learned throughout the application process was really showing them what you can get out of the fellowship. So I think sometimes we're really interested in showing them everything we've already done, but I think it's just as important to show them what you can do with this fellowship and why investing in you for 1 year throughout this opportunity is valuable and can contribute to the field going forward.
I totally agree with everything Sarah just said. I would add that one of my biggest takeaway lessons was the importance of translation, like from the fellowship. And so I think in the application process, just similar to what Sarah said, like we have all this research experience, right? We've gone through graduate school or whatever level of education you're at. And that is of interest, I think, but they may not understand exactly what that looks like. And so we can talk about the papers we've written or the presentations we've done and the projects we've worked on, but translating that to something that is a fit for what that agency or office is looking for, again, and then also emphasizing the impact or potential impact, because sometimes we work on projects that we move away from before they're finalized or anything like that. But I would just add that little tidbit.
And I would say that just reminded me too that really just showing that you're open to learning a variety of different experiences is important too, because I know at least with the SRCD fellowship at the state level, they don't require you to propose a project going into the fellowship year. So really kind of, you know, putting out a few ideas of what you might work on, but not necessarily being prescriptive in exactly what you're going to do, because it really is a natural experience over the year and kind of experiencing what comes up naturally day to day.
That's good advice. Thank you. All right, we have a couple more questions here. Thanks for sending them in, guys. So Caitlin's asking, what are some of the things you wish you'd known prior to your fellowship? And what, if anything, would you have done differently with that information?
I don't have an answer off the top of my head. Sarah, do you want to go again first?
Yeah, this is really good timing because we just had our portfolio presentations for SRCD where we had to answer that exact question. So for me, it really came down to once I was in the position, feeling comfortable with my expertise and skill set to be able to voice what I knew and to propose ideas. I was pretty hesitant at first. It can be intimidating in a new world outside of academia, but they, for the most part, were really open and really excited about researchers being involved in the work that they were doing. So I think, if anything, I would have just tried to encourage myself to be more upfront from the beginning with, hey, this is what I've spent the past 5 years learning, and this is what I can bring to your team.
I would add from the congressional side, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, I wish that I understood going in more so that I needed to learn about the staff, which is not as easy to do as the member, right? Like they don't have a website talking about their policy priorities. But that had a significant, it had a significant impact for me on like my day-to-day. Those are the people that like that you're working with and who you're reporting to. And that some of that information is available. I don't think I focused on it enough when I was making my ultimate selection. I will share, I had a bit of a rough year like in my placement, specifically related to staff, a specific staff member. And so I wish I had known that beforehand. There was a point where I had thought about leaving the office that I was in, which I was supported to do by AAAS and my APA because of those difficulties, but I felt very committed to, I felt like I should stick to the commitment that I made, but it was challenging nonetheless. It's very exciting in the beginning. I'm from California, like moving to DC. I forget, I think I was like 32 when I moved to DC. And I was like, all right, like let's do this fun, exciting thing. But I do wish I had slowed down a little bit and taken a little more time in reviewing the office selection in that process.
Thanks. Okay, couple mini questions from Nicolin. Where do you recommend looking to find out about these opportunities? And do you have any recommendations for expanding your network?
Well, the first one is pretty easy for me to answer. So the SRCD website has a web page that has information on both the federal and state level fellowships. There's also information on, they just started doing this, but they have portfolios for all of the state fellows with an abstract of what we did. So you can head there and just see kind of the variety of different experiences that all of us have had over the years and in our different agencies. I think you'll see quite a bit of diversity in terms of not only topic area from, you know, child care to school readiness, and mine was a little bit more child maltreatment prevention, but also in the skill sets that you gain. So they're able to be searched, I believe, by like topic area and also by the type of activity. So I would head there. For network expansion, I mean, joining groups, if you're not already a member of SRCD, was a big one for me. The research to policy collaboration, leaning on my connections there, and relationship with Taylor Scott was really helpful. I think really utilizing the connections that you have and not being afraid just to ask people to connect you. So now you have a connection to the SRCD State Fellowship and the AAAS. So just using us however you can to get connected to other people has been really useful for me too.
Yeah, I think that Mary, who's asked the next question, her question is part of my answer. The listservs is where I, through the various organizations, is where I would recommend people checking out. As you join the organizations, you'll learn more about those opportunities. I want to say I feel like at one point that I thought there's somewhere on the interwebs there is a list of the policy fellowships that are available, because even beyond the ones that are listed here, there are a few others that I'm not as familiar with, but I learned about in the process of talking to various people who are interested in the policy fellowship experience. I don't have anything to add. I think Sarah covered the expansion of network question wonderfully.
I got a link from somebody I did an informational interview with recently, that somebody had started like a thread on LinkedIn of all the different policy training fellowships. So I will try to find that again and email that out to everyone if I can find that. Okay. Would you recommend to applying to more than one fellowship when you're looking?
So this is tough for me because I'm going to say yes, but I didn't. So for the SRCD fellowship, you can apply to all three. So there's the state level, executive, and congressional, and then obviously the fellowship that Nick was a part of and any others. I always tend to apply to more than just one. It was just a unique situation for me in that I was really set on either working at the state level or working for one of the companies I had applied for. So I guess I didn't apply to multiple fellowships, but I applied to multiple positions at once.
I echo what Sarah said again. I definitely think that if you're interested, you should. And I think it's a pretty common practice also. It's expected and people know that people will apply to multiple ones. I also only applied to the APA congressional one because that's what I was familiar with at the time. APA, SRCD, SPICY, which is a division of APA, APF, and AAAS. All of them are, for the congressional and executive branch fellowships, are ran by AAAS. AAAS also has their, like you can also apply directly through them and they host a couple of fellows. But your sponsoring organization is the one who selects and funds you to go through the program that is ran by AAAS. I will share, I probably should have said this in the beginning, I'm actually on the selection committee for SPICY. So I do their fellows interviews. I've done them for 2 years now. It's a 3-year term, so I have 1 more year coming up. And I would say the policy director and the executive director, and then there are a few of us, 3 past fellows who serve on the committee. But the people who have been doing it longer than I have definitely shared like, oh, this seems more like an SRCD application. So they're familiar with like where the fit is. And I will tell you as a tidbit from being an application reviewer and an interviewer, they very much, when you are looking to apply to multiple fellowships, they very much see for SPICY specifically, like what's your connection with SPICY, with the organization? So this is, and SPICY is the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues. And then what has your engagement with the organization been? So if it's somebody who has never had, who isn't a member, because I don't even think membership is a requirement, I don't understand that, but I don't think it is, but who's never attended a conference or been a part of a committee or done anything with the organization and applied, that might be weighted a little bit differently than somebody who's like SPICY, SPICY, SPICY all the time. I say that, but there have been at least 2 fellows in the last 5 years who were the not really involved with SPICY, but so much in line with the mission of SPICY, and they ended up being selected. SPICY has 1 fellow per year. Don't know how many more times I can say SPICY, so I'll stop there.
Well, one other thing maybe to highlight is the fellowship term. So mine was 1 year. I know the SRCD federal level, you can reapply for a 2nd year. I'm not sure, Nick, what your term was.
Yeah, so the congressional ones are capped at a year because then it starts, it's a legality thing. So it starts looking like the organization is gifting too much to the government, but they have the executive side and those ones have that 1 year extension.
So kind of a specific question, Sarah, when you mentioned that for SRCD, you can apply to like all 3, the state, congressional, and executive level. And I guess maybe Nick, in your case too, like, can you apply for multiple levels within the same application, or is it a different application that you fill out for each of those levels?
It's a different application, at least the state and federal. I'm not sure on the difference between the federal, congressional, and executive, but it is for sure from the state to federal.
Okay.
For APA, it's the same. It's a different application, and they don't have the state level opportunity, but they have the executive branch and the congressional fellowship. I think, as my memory is being jogged, they're also very used to people applying to both. So like when the executive branch, usually the congressional one wins out, this is top priority. So the executive the director of the executive fellowship will be like, oh no, like we're losing applicants because they're accepting positions through the congressional in one organization or even within APA. I think though that the materials of course, you would want to tailor it more to wanting to work in an agency versus legislative work on the Hill. But I think the letters of recommendation and the actual application itself, with the exception of the letter of intent, probably pretty standard across the board, the same for everybody.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Let me pause for a second and ask if anyone else has any questions they want to chime in with, either via chat or just unmute yourself.
I have a question as sort of a follow-up to some of the stuff that you guys have talked about. Thank you so much. This is such helpful information. I'm just wondering if past fellows are willing to share, you guys included share materials, like application materials, or if there might, I know some fellowships have like repositories where fellows have already like submitted or uploaded like application materials. I'm just wondering if that might exist, like example materials to rely on.
I'm not familiar of anything like that. Usually when I do one-on-one interviews with people, I will offer to send them my cover letter. Although I think I've totally seen like 2 typos. But I'm happy to send that to Toria if that would be helpful to share.
Thank you.
Yes. Same for me.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have a question that didn't already get answered?
I have a question. Again, thank you so much for really spending your time and evening wherever you are with us. That it's really appreciated. But also, I think just logistically thinking about the process of being in a postdoc, which is very different from being in graduate school, could you maybe speak about the sorts of mentorship supports that you received through the organizations that you were working in? And also, a separate question is related to what was the economic reimbursement that you had, the pay, the health benefits, the things that we all know that we need, but we might not think about until we're in the moment and switching healthcare. Could you maybe speak about those day-to-day changes that are important?
Sure, I'll go first. So I'm very much an APA person. I tell everybody that. I had a really extraordinary support from my host organization. They were the first sponsoring organization, so they've been doing this for like 40 something years at this point. So it's a very well organized program. So finances. For APA, their stipend, because you're technically a contractor that year, I think starts at, they changed it over the last couple of years. I think it starts at $70,000, which is a lot coming out of grad school and even coming out of another postdoc. It's totally enough to live off of, I would say, in DC, based on my experience. In addition to that, they covered a stipend for health insurance each month, and then they also gave us a few $1,000s, $2,000 or $3,000 for educational opportunities to attend conferences and travel and stuff like that, and I used all of that. They also paid for the move, so they paid a lot. APA recently had a 25% staffing reduction, so I don't know how generous they are these days, but that is kind of their standard. SPICY pays a little bit less. It's a smaller organization. They have a little bit less to give, but it's still, in my perspective, they cover the health insurance and all of that enough to live off of in DC for the year. The mentorship piece for APA, for APA specifically, they host a reception just with past APA fellows at the very beginning of the year. So you are immediately immersed in people who want to be engaged and mentor you. The second, or the last Friday of every month, you have lunch at APA, where you meet with the directors and they problem solve with you and they help professional development. And then the second half of the year, they bring in past fellows, and it changes every year based on the interests and future career interests of their current fellows. So they really access that network in order to connect you with people to help you move forward. SPICY does the same, a similar thing where they host at the beginning of the year all social science happy hour and invite past fellows from all of those organizations and expand your network in that way as well. I still am in touch with at least a handful of people who are past fellows who have offered me mentorship and or friendship at different levels across those years. I don't think there's, in my experience, so much research specific mentorship, but that's because I'm a clinician. But I've gotten a lot around professional development and job opportunities and expanding that. I think I answered all the questions.
Yes, so similar, I guess starting with the pay, it was similar, I think a little bit more than what Nick cited as the overall yearly compensation. It's also a contract position, so you have to take into account self-employment tax and all the good things that come along with that. But similarly, you know, you get compensated for health insurance, for professional development, and all of that information can be found on the website for SRCD for this fellowship. I'd encourage you just to go there to get that information because it does change. It is in line with federal pay grade. So depending on when that changes is how they make any form of compensation changes. And then in terms of support and mentorship, for me, it was very seamless going from my academic mentorship to this fellowship because in contrast to the federal level, you're the only fellow at your placement agency. So I had an academic mentor all to myself. I had my supervisor all to myself, other than obviously her daily duties and her normal job. But I met with them weekly. We had calls with the other fellows. So there are 4 pre-doc fellows and 2 postdoc fellows, at least this year. For my fellowship there were. So we had video meetings, and those were chances for all of us to reflect together. So you did get some sort of connection to the network of other fellows as well. And then really the fellowship structures a lot of it for you. So they have trainings that are relevant to your state's policy on child and family issues. You have check-in calls with them regularly. So it really feels very supported and that they have invested in your professional development.
How is the transition out? So since you guys are both in 1-year positions, do you kind of come in having to already think about what's going to happen afterwards? And are there opportunities or aids in trying to land a position after the fellowship?
Yes, so that is the one downside of the 1-year placement is that I had just come off of, you know, applying for positions and fellowship positions, getting started, and you're already right back in the cycle of needing to apply for the next year's round of jobs. So that was a bit stressful. I was fortunate in that I was able to get a job offer somewhat early in the fellowship. So there were at least a few months where I was just like working as a normal fellowship and not also applying for and stressing about job interviews. So that was really helpful. I think the fellowship itself provided webinars and trainings frequently, like I said, each month, I think it was. And they had different types of job career professionals give talks. So we were exposed to people who went from a policy career and did pure policy research or pure policy on the ground work, or were at an academic institution. So they were able to provide a little bit of a variety of helping us to see where the career trajectory could go.
I would agree. Also, the 1-year position is stressful in that way. I wasn't applying for academic jobs being a clinician, but a number of my peers were, and it was essentially as soon as we started, like within a couple of months, they were already applying for the next year. I had an interesting experience, I would say, where I had a policy position lined up that fell through at the last minute, and it was like literally the last month of fellowship. So I was unemployed for a couple of months following the fellowship. However, I was very conservative in my saving to pay self-employment taxes, as Sarah had mentioned earlier. And so I had a little bit of savings that was totally fine because I was so conservative in how much I was saving taxes. Having that wiggle room really turned out to be a great experience, although on the front end, right, like it doesn't feel so great with the uncertainty. But I ended up working at the Uniformed Services University doing suicide research with active duty service members. And then I ended up moving from that position to a subject matter expert position in clinical psychology at the Psych Health Center of Excellence. So those were really great stepping stones while I was applying to the Navy for my commission. I will say that was a unique experience, but again, my sponsoring organization does an exceptional job of connecting people and even like connecting you with opportunities that they see. Like I think that the host organizations, from my own experience and my peers, really felt supported in that way, that like they weren't like one and done. As soon as they were over, they weren't fellows anymore. I hate this saying, but AAAS, what is it? Once a fellow, always a fellow. And like really the network, like there are listservs of past fellows that are like hundreds and hundreds of people. And there is I'm not on it anymore actually, but it was like 3 to 4 emails a day on average with job listings, like policy listings across subject areas to really help people expand that network. So once you have access to the AAAS program, I think they really do their best to continue supporting their alumni along the way.
Awesome. Well, we have just a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure if anyone has any other questions that we get those answered. Anything y'all have been hanging on to for this entire hour? All right, well then maybe we can end with you guys just sharing briefly the most rewarding thing about the fellowship for you.
It's a tough one.
I can go ahead. Like I said, I just had my whole portfolio presentation and reflection, so they're very fresh in my brain. I think for me, it was just really cool to be able to do research and see the impact so quickly. So at the state level, you know, I was able to work on model development for 2 different programs, and those changes that I was able to contribute to were immediate. Like you could see the effect of it and see the process of policy taking place. And I think that that was something that I didn't expect because you often, you know, talk about government processes as being slow. But I think in the world, at least at the state government level and the implementation level, they were quite nimble in their ability to take new information and constantly adjust. So that was surprising and really rewarding for me.
I will say that I have, the number one for me are the friends that I made along the way. And I'm not saying that to be cliche, but like I made some really amazing friends that I'm still in touch with. I just closed escrow yesterday, and one of my friends who I spent a lot of time with but haven't talked to recently because the Navy takes all the time, like was texting me today, and like we're still in such close contact when we can be. The other piece, I would say, the last three weeks before I left the fellowship is when the current administration tried to implement the transgender military ban, and I got to do some really unique work based on that in my last 3 weeks, and the most meaningful work I got to do the entire year. And I've got to continue working in different ways on that issue, both within and outside of the military. So that opportunity, it was a terrible situation, but it created an opportunity for me to continue engaging and really become an area where people consider me to have expertise based on my policy efforts that came out of the fellowship.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, Mary asked, can we continue to stay in touch with you in the future? Are you guys opposed at all to me sharing your emails with the group if they want to reach out with further questions? Okay, awesome.
Absolutely.
So, then yeah, if you guys don't mind, if you want to send me your cover letters and any other resources you might have, I'll pass them along. And yeah, thank you again for giving us your time and your wisdom tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Have a good